Hello everybody, today we are going to be going through the Microsoft default visuals, how to set them up, which ones are best, how to get the most value out of them, and kind of what all of their customizations are. So we're going to go through all of those default ones that we see in the visualization pane, which ones are the most valuable, how to use them, and how to make them look pretty on your reporting page. So on the page right here, we've just got some samples that we'll go through, the decomposition tree, some nice pretty maps with some bubbles, a gauge, some cars, some bar graphs, some area charts, and whatever this thing is, this composition, this tree map. So all right, so we'll go kind of through all of these setups and all of the other ones that we've got as well. All right, so starting from scratch, what we are going to be working with, let me just show you our model here real quick. So we've got an employee table for going into clients, employees own some clients, and then those clients replacing orders. So our orders is our fact table going up to there with the date relationship on our order date. Sorry, so very basic model, right? So let's go ahead and along with the basic model, very basic measures, just going to be doing some sums and some counts and throwing them on the page here. So all right, so let's get started. We'll just kind of go top to bottom, left to right. So let's go ahead and throw on a stacked bar chart onto here. Let's throw client name on there. All right, so now what we want to do here is after we get our, let's go total order value. There we go. Sorry, I was on the wrong one. Thinking about the wrong one visual. So what we do for a bar chart, the way that we work with this stacked bar chart. So what the stacked bar chart means is that we can throw on multiple values onto this chart, and then it will sum up those values. So if we want to go with multiple counts, we can just add them up on top of each other, right? So now what we're going to have is we're going to have our count of orders stacked on top of our total value of orders, and it's just going to be super small, so we're not going to see them all. But that's what the stack means, right? So our values are just going to be stacked right on top of each other, as opposed to having a cluster chart where they're next to each other, right? So the cluster is going to signify them being next to each other, and then a stacked is going to be we're putting those values, or putting our measures into one column within that visual, right? So that's what a stacked is. So the way that you can think about stacked and when these might be valuable is, for instance, if you're doing some counts on a couple of different tables and you have some measures that you need to see how many counts the total products have been ordered for each client, but for whatever reason you've got your orders across different tables, you can use this stacked visual and kind of put those visuals together on top, and then do a total sum on the data labels. So then you'll do the total sum of all of the stacked values instead of each individual one, right? So very beneficial kind of stack chart there. Another nice one that you can use is just switching it to a different way. So instead of having the bar chart, instead of having it horizontally, you can just display it differently with the vertical. So essentially same visual, just one way versus the other, right? Bar versus column. So then getting into a cluster, so also very similar to the stacked, we kind of briefly went over it, right? It's just right next to it instead of on top of it. So instead of having the two values stacked on top, you can just have the two values next to each other. So again, if you just want to show, let's go, instead of that, let's do count of orders and average. What if we do average order value? There you go. So that looks a bit nicer, right? So now you can see kind of we've got some orders plus the average order value, and they're just, again, stacked next to each other as opposed to being on top of each other. So again, if we flip that over, so now you can kind of see a better visualization of them being stacked, those values, again, being stacked on top of each other. And so one of those things that you can add to it is with that stacked visual is instead of having each of those categories summed up with just the detail labels, so at the data labels, each of these columns are summed up, right? Or each of those measures are summed. Whereas you can also just have the total label turned on, and then you're showing that full value like I was talking about. So same kind of thing with the clustered on the column chart stacked and clustered, both same kind of visuals, just vertically versus displayed horizontally. So the 100% bar chart, what this is going to do is this is going to be 100% on your stacked values. So instead of having an actual value, so instead of these being actual dollar values like they were originally, so this count of orders is 8,300 orders, right? And then this average order is $1,500. But what the 100% stacked visual does is puts everything into 100% value, so you get a grand total, right? So what are the ratio of our orders to order value, right? This comparison doesn't make sense, but it's a good way of visualizing some 100% comparisons. Again, vertically versus horizontally. So this top row is essentially 3 different visuals with just the option of displaying them vertically versus displaying them horizontally. So alrighty, so let me go with a nice and pretty one here. Let me get this prettied up and then kind of tossed into the corner. Let's go with, we want total value on here. Let's kick you guys out. Let's go detail. And let's throw on our client industry on top. Okay, cool. And one more thing to do here is let's throw on a little legend for the order type. Item category on the legend, and there we go. So now we've got some additional nice looking funness. Let's go to display on 2, and let's go to, sure, we can keep that auto. Looks a bit funky with the total value there, but that's fine. So alrighty, so once we've got, actually let's go client territory, right? That's what we wanted to do. Where are you? Where are you? Client location, is that what it is? This one should work, okay. So once we've got this row down, let's go on to the next row. So on the next row, for the order value, what we can do with, or for this line chart, right? So for this line chart visual, let's again just throw on some measures here. So total order value and count of orders. So what this is going to do is this is also just going to be kind of exactly what it says, just a line chart visual. And the way it's going to visualize is something like this. Let me go ahead and throw a year slicer on here to minimize this a bit. So what this is going to show is just a, again, line chart for the values that you place on it. So putting a month and year on the visual, and then values on the X, we can hover over and see what our values are. So we've got an X and a Y value. And again, so the default visuals do limit things with the ability to have secondaries or non-secondaries. This one does have the ability to have a secondary axis. So what we can do here is just drag and drop the count of orders, so the value that's different in a different measurement value than our total order value, into the secondary, and now we can have that visual display nice and neatly with our 2 different axes values on the left and the right. And let's say we didn't want to show the count of order axes, we can come over here and turn that axis off, but we can still see the values there, right? So we can still see them up there, but we just turned it off. So quick and easy to throw that visual on, and let's switch this over to a area chart. It's a very similar looking visual. This is just going to be by one axis this time. Or sorry, we do have 2 axes on here on our area chart as well, but the way that this one can work is the best way to display information on the area chart is to kind of compare months or years to each other. So the way I like to visualize data on this one is use some time intelligence functions and let's go order value last year. Let's put it on the same axis, and then we can kind of show some comparisons between our order growth last year and this year. And let's do a tooltip on this visual to show the year-over-year growth. And so now when we hover over our values, we will show in that tooltip the order value for the currently selected time frame, the order value for the last year, and then the growth rate of the current year to previous year. Right? So again, just quickly throwing that value up on the visuals, 3 measures to have that big, powerful visual showing. Another one that we can select up here, I usually don't use a stacked area chart. Area chart should be fine, so you can ignore this one. Let's get another visual going and make this one a stacked line. So very similar to the other bar and column charts up here, the other option that the stacked and clustered line column chart is going to do is you will be able to throw in that growth rate as a line, right? So let's put the growth rate as a line here, and let's take you off of there. And so now we can see that growth rate on those order values year over year. So we've got that growth rate with our year over year growth on our orders with the visualization instead of just having a area chart one on top of the other. We can actually visualize what that growth rate was with that trend line on the same visual with that bar stacked and line chart. I haven't used the ribbon chart, don't know its value. I'm sure it's great, haven't used it much. Waterfall chart also haven't used. The funnel chart, what the funnel visual is this is good for essentially it does exactly what it says it does, right? It's the funnel for activities. So let's say you have various activities to get down to a certain end goal. So from the recruiting world, right? You submit a CV to somebody, they start interviewing, you have a first, second, third interview, and then they get a placement, right? So that's kind of the funnel process. And so you could easily just stack in a single value here with that activity column in your value for the funnel, and there you have a nice clean funnel visual. I don't usually use scatter charts. The default visual isn't too great for the scatter plot. Custom visuals are better than the default. Default pie chart, very nice and easy to use. Nothing special on the pie chart. Let's throw on some order categories and then count of orders. Just a quick easy pie chart to just show the count of orders by category, and if you want to drill down into the visual, you can throw another category under there, and you can drill down by pushing that little drill down arrow on the Microsoft Visuals. And if you don't want to drill down, you can just unclick that arrow, and then everything else will filter without drilling down, so you can see exactly what you're filtering for. And the pie chart or donut chart, very similar to the pie chart, just a different kind of look and feel to it. You can kind of throw something in the middle of this donut if you want to, throw another visual, throw a card in there if you want to use that white space. Just another option to visualize this information, categorical information, in another way. Same thing with this tree map. Tree map very similar to these other options, just a different way of visualizing it. Let's say total order value to split this up a bit. So some people prefer this way, others like the donuts and pie charts, however you prefer. Another great one is getting into the maps here. So on the map visuals, we do need lat and long. So Power BI does need lat and long for mapping. It is sometimes tough to get, but when you do have lat and long, you can start to really throw some powerful visuals onto a mapping visual and completely change how you can visualize your data with just a map to know where your customers are and how the heavy traffic is in one location or another. And the way we want to add the bubbles is by one of your measures to change the bubble size. Let's go count. Let's make these bubbles a bit smaller here. There we go. So now we can quickly see on the map visual kind of where that condensed population is that are having our high volume of orders, right? And then you can quickly drill into where those orders are and click on them, and everything else will filter. Right, so just these map visuals, default visuals, nice, quick, and easy. You just need lat and long. That's the only downside to these visuals. A nice gauge visual. So these are great for kind of showing some targets and progress to goal kind of tracking. So just as a sample here, I will show what these can look like. So with this gauge, let's say we've got some activity that we're trying to see. We're trying to measure people's on-time performance for some activity. So you can obviously be 100% for that on-time performance. We just have a realistic goal of 90%, and currently everything is at a 74%, right? So just a way that you can kind of visualize how people are doing against goal or against targets or against the max value. The gauge visual does have some value to be able to show some of those tracking to goal metrics. So we've got some cards here. I'll go through these cards a bit later. This KPI visual I don't usually use. The custom ones are, again, usually better than this one. I haven't seen much value out of this one. Slicers, of course, slicers are used for everything. Throw a slicer on for anything in any field in there so you can slice and dice your data. We've got some tables. Don't need to go through tables. Those are just basic tables of your data. Key influencers, this is used for some like AI uses to process this. I don't usually use this because it's not too great, especially if your model starts getting pretty complicated, so I tend to stay away from that. Decomposition tree. Decomposition tree is extremely valuable. So within the decomposition tree, what you are able to do is, let's throw some stuff onto here. So let's analyze. What we're going to analyze is it's going to be the value that we're going to start splitting up into that tree, right? So we're going to analyze our total value, or our total order value. Let's do it by the territory, by the role, by the employee name, and then let's go by client. All right, so let's see what this looks like. So what this visual does is, when you are at the base level of the visual, there will be this plus button. So when you press the plus button, it's going to pop out those values that you just threw on as options as fields of the visual, right? So we just threw on all of these 4 options, and we can now select, once we push this plus button, how we want to break the visual out next. And when you publish this report, this also gives the viewers that same freedom to choose how they want to tree out that value. So let's say they wanted to first go with client name, and then they wanted to see what employee was doing best for that client. You could do it that way, or if you wanted to do it a different way, you could also go client or employee into client, right? So it gives the viewer a big freedom on being able to choose how they want to break out that data. But let's just go for the full way. I'll just give you a sample here. So let's go with territory into role, splitting out into the employee name, and then let's go client name. And this visual is pretty good in the focus mode, just because it can focus everything out and make everything big. And then so you can kind of just see how nice the visual looks when you break it out like this. So if you go to the east, you can kind of see, again, just nice and clean flow of all of that data of where everything's placed and where all of those highest values are going. You can quickly, easily see. And then the way this visual works for filtering is, when you're all the way, whatever item you select is where it will go for the filtering, right? So let's say we select up to the employee name. What we've filtered for is, we filtered for the territory east, the role of account manager, and the employee name of Adam Kelly. So on each of these visuals is we filtered that far down for each of these visuals, right? So we've got employee east, account manager role, and the employee name is Kelly. If we go up 1, then it will just be the account manager, right? So then we'll include only those 2. And so we got everything, we'll filter everything with these visuals too. And then let's get into the last thing here, being so these ones, Q&A, pretty difficult to set up, not for this video. Smart narrative, again, same thing. Metrics, this is a good one. Almost like a card, though. What this metrics does is, this metrics is connected to the Power BI service, where you can store Power BI metrics for various teams. Different conversation, but it does allow for tracking of these goals with a gauge very nicely. But tracking goals within Power BI is a whole different video that we can get into later. But if you are using metrics, this metric visual goes along with tracking those metrics in the Power BI service. And so let's get into the cards. The new card that they just published is called literally card new. So when we add this to the visual, what card new does is it has a whole lot of options, pretty much a video on its own. But let's just throw on some basic values here and blow this up and go through the formatting of this card. So what this card does is, it's pretty much like a multi-card, but within the card there are a whole lot more options now that you have. You can throw in images, you can throw in accent bars, glows, shadows, all for each individual card too, not just for the whole series. You can customize each individual value within this multi-card, right? So your options on this card have opened up immensely. Let's go ahead and just format this real quick. So the way that we want to format it, let's go ahead and use the callout. Don't want that to be nearly that big. Let's just go to 12. To make the display units none. Decimals, let's go to 0. Don't need to show any of that. And our label, that is too big too. Let's move that down. Great, now we can move it back into a card size. Still a bit too big, taking up too much room. Let's remove some of that spacing. So there we go. Now we can smush it down some more. Still a bit too much spacing on the top, so let's go ahead and remove that. On the shape, where is this? On the layout, we are going to want to do, there we go. On the card section in the padding, it's going to be the narrow section, and then you can see that we've, again, just trimmed down some of that white space just a bit more. And there we go. So now I've kind of got our multi-card in a nice clean visual format. And that's how we can get all of those visuals working in a easy filterable way. So we've quickly gone through kind of all of the Power BI default Microsoft visuals and how we can get them on the page and how to display them with some data. Now the way that they interact with each other is the last step in this video. So when you, as you were seeing as I was clicking around in here, you can see some of these things are highlighting, right? So we're just highlighting our visuals of what values are being filtered for. Sometimes that's not always the best idea. So the way to change that between the visual interactions is to go to select on any visual, go to the format button at the top, and then edit interactions. And so what this is going to do is it's going to open up these visual interactions between all of the visuals themselves. So what's going to be selectable are going to be these filter, highlight, or none. So what that does is, let's go through an example. So when we select Adam again, on this visual that we've now set to filter, you can see that we filter this whole visual now. Whereas if we go to highlight, it keeps the visual as is and only highlights the value that is Adam's values, right? But if we filter it, so we want the whole thing to now look for just Adam's values, we can just change that interaction to show filter. And let's say for whatever reason we don't want this visual to be filtered by this visual, we can then do the same thing but have it be none. Instead of have it filter to completely filter by that value, we can just have it not filter at all. Same thing with all these other visuals. We can have them filter as opposed to highlight. So you see how these are going from highlighted to now being filtered by just clicking on the visual and then setting its filter pane type to being highlighted to filtered. And there you go. That is a quick high-level overview of the Microsoft Power BI visuals. Hopefully that helps get you guys started on how to use these visuals. Let me know if you guys have any questions in the comments. Happy to address them and get you guys the answers you need. And looking forward to the next one. Bye, guys.